Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista here. I'll be shaking it up a little bit today and doing something a little bit different. Today I'll be making homemade treats and treat boxes to put them in. The first treats I'll be making today are chocolate billionaires. I found this recipe in Taste of Home Best Loved Cookies and Candies 2010 edition. This recipe can be found on page 90 and was originally submitted by Humphrey. For this recipe, you'll need about 7 ounces of caramel, a half a cup of crisp rice cereal, 3/4 of a cup of chopped pecans, some chocolate for dipping, as well as a tablespoon of water and a teaspoon of shortening. To start, I unwrapped all of my caramels and added a tablespoon of water. I'll melt my caramel on a double boiler. While the caramel is melting, I greased my candy mold cups with the all vegetable shortening, just a really light layer. And now that the caramel is melted, I can incorporate the Rice Crisp cereal as well as the chopped pecans. You want to be careful when handling the bowl off the double boiler, as the bowl will still be hot. You can also use a homemade caramel if you prefer, or melt your caramels in the microwave. I prefer to use the double boiler personally. When melting the caramel, you'll want to be careful to not overheat the caramel, as it'll pass the soft ball stage and enter the hard ball stage. The hard ball stage makes the caramel really hard and impossible to chew. Using a spoon and a butter knife, I'll divide the mixture into the greased candy cups before pressing them down with my finger. Pressing them down is optional. I wanted my candies to have a uniform shape. If you prefer an organic shape to your chocolate billionaires, pressing them down isn't necessary. With the mixture divided, I'll set them into the fridge to harden up for about 10 minutes. While those candies are in the fridge, I'll melt my chocolate on the double boiler. I'm using Belgian chocolate wafers as well as some Hershey's Mini Kiss chocolate chips. And to that I'll add about a teaspoon of shortening. So it's about a cup of chocolate to a teaspoon of shortening. If you are using chocolate molding wafers, the shortening isn't necessary. The shortening is only necessary when you're using chocolate chips or a chocolate wafer. You'd also be more than welcome to melt your chocolate in the microwave at 30-second intervals. I prefer a double boiler because I feel like I have more control. The thing about a double boiler is you want to make sure that the water is not touching the bottom of the bowl that holds your chocolate. When the water touches the bottom of the bowl, it puts the chocolate in direct contact with the heat, and it's more easily burned that way. The other thing about this recipe or when working with chocolate is you want to make sure that you don't get any water into your chocolate mixture. This will cause your chocolate to seize. After the chocolate's been melted, I will line the now clean candy cup mold with candy papers. I prefer to use the paper cups that have the foil on the inside. The candies release really easily from the cups that have the foil on the inside. Placing the caramel candies into the chocolate one at a time, I will pick them up with a slotted spoon and spoon them into the candy cups. Since the chocolate coating was relatively thin on top of the caramels, I wanted to add some more chocolate to the top, and I did that just using a spoon. Once all the candies are coated in chocolate, I'll set them in the fridge to set up. The second treat I'll be making today are peanut butter cups. And to start, I'll line my clean candy mold with candy papers. These again are foil lined for easy release. On the double boiler, I melted some chocolate using the cup to about a teaspoon of shortening method. This time though, I put it into a squeeze bottle. These squeeze bottles are not microwave safe, So if you choose to microwave your chocolate, you'll still have to microwave it in a separate bowl and transfer it to a squeeze bottle. And I'm just filling the bottom of each cup with a little bit of chocolate. If you don't have a squeeze bottle, you can use a spoon to spoon both the chocolate and the peanut butter into the candy cups. Once all of the bottoms are filled with chocolate, I'll set those in the fridge to set up and melt the peanut butter for the middle. The chocolate was in the freezer for about 10 minutes just to set the chocolate, but you can also place them in the fridge for about 20 minutes. Again, I'm using a squeeze bottle, so to melt the peanut butter, I melted it in a mug and transferred it to the squeeze bottle with a spatula and a funnel. The thing that I like about this recipe is that I can choose how much chocolate to how much peanut butter I add to my cups. So if you're a person who likes more peanut butter, you're welcome to add more peanut butter. If you like more chocolate, you're welcome to add more chocolate. I started by melting about 1/4 of a cup of peanut butter, but I did need more peanut butter. So in the end, I ended up melting about 1/2 cup of peanut butter. Once peanut butter has been added to all of the cups, I'll set them back in the freezer to sit up for about another 10 minutes. If you overfill your peanut butter squeeze jar, that's okay. I didn't add anything to the melted peanut butter, so I was okay with adding the excess peanut butter back to the peanut butter jar. Now that the peanut butter has set up, I'll add a top layer of chocolate. With the shortening in the chocolate and the chocolate not being tempered, I found that the chocolate did stay runny for a long period of time. If you do find that your chocolate is setting up a little bit too quickly, you can always place your squeeze bottle in a warm bottle of water. And it's worth noting that this is chocolate, not chocolate molding wafers. Chocolate molding wafers may set up faster than a melted chocolate chip or a Belgian chocolate wafer that has been melted. Since I was adding 1 chocolate billionaire and 1 peanut butter cup into each of the treat boxes, I wanted there to be a way to distinguish between the two. The way that I chose to do it was I added a squiggle of peanut butter on top of the peanut butter cups. Other ways you can distinguish the two are adding chopped up pecans to the top of the billionaires or melting a white chocolate chip and drizzling it on top of a candy of your choice. With the candies complete, I just wanted to give you a view of the inside of the candy, the chocolate billionaire and the peanut butter cup. The peanut butter cup is definitely easier to slice than the chocolate billionaire. With the treats made, it's time to make some treat boxes, and I'm going to start by coloring some cardstock. This was 110-pound cardstock. And to color this cardstock, I squished some wilted violet distress ink, some picked raspberry distress ink, and seedless preserves distress ink onto my glass mat before spraying it with a little bit of water and pressing my cardstock into the ink mixture. I want to dip this cardstock a couple more times to get a little bit more saturation, but I want to make sure that the cardstock is dry between each dipping. I call this technique the dip and drag technique. With the cardstock completely dry, I'll die cut the treat box using Lawn Fawn Fancy Box die. I chose this die from the set to create a window in my box, and I'll just run that through my die cut machine. The thing that I like about the Fancy Box die is that it comes with a couple dies to create windows in your box, but also a few die cuts to decorate your box as well. I'm enclosing the window with a piece of acetate. I prefer to fold all the score lines on the top of the box before adding the acetate window This helps me ensure that I don't have a piece of acetate that's too big that will create problems later on to close and fold the box. I trim down my piece of acetate using a paper trimmer before adhering it with super glue. Before I decorate my box, I'll fold along all of the score lines. Another thing that I like about this die is that I only need to die cut one piece of cardstock. With the acetate window attached, I can now decorate my box. From gold foil cardstock, I'm choosing to die cut Lawn Fawn's Scripty XOXO lawn cuts. The Scripty XOXO was added to the window of the box with liquid adhesive. Permanent tape runner was added to each of the tabs of the box. To create the box, the tab is adhered to the inside of the adjacent corner. When this box is die cut, the die creates a slot as well as a tab for closure. To close the box, the tab of the box is inserted into the slot. The second box I want to keep a little bit more simple, and I'll start by embossing a piece of 110-pound white cardstock. To prep this cardstock, I will eliminate most of the static by using a dedicated paintbrush and a dryer sheet. And the image I'll be stamping is Simon Says Cling Stamp Heart to Heart background stamp using Versamark ink. For embossing powder, I'll use Recollections Gold Detail Embossing Powder before setting that with a heat tool. Just as I did before, I die cut this piece of cardstock using Lawn Fawn Fancy Box die. I'll then fold along all of the score lines, add adhesive, and adhere the tabs to the inside of the adjacent corner. I then thought it might be neat to incorporate both techniques. So off camera, I embossed the same Simon Says Cling Stamp Heart to Heart background onto a piece of 110-pound cardstock and embossed that again with Recollections Gold Detail Embossing Powder. To color this cardstock, I used Seedless Preserves, Picked Raspberry, and Wilted Violet using the dip and drag technique I used earlier. To make sure that the hearts were oriented right side up by the person opening the box, I made sure that the bottom of the heart was lined up with the tab of the die. This will ensure that the hearts are oriented correctly when the box is opened. I'll switch things up a bit for the next box by using craft cardstock and cutting an oval window into the top of the box. This oval is also included in the set. Once the window to the box is cut, I'll add an acetate window with some super glue. For this box, I chose Thanks in gold foil cardstock. The Thanks die is included in the Fancy Box die set. Using liquid adhesive, I adhered the sentiment to the front of the window. For embellishment, I'll use these butterflies. These butterflies were created in the creating one background for multiple elements on multiple cards, maximizing the use of supplies video. I'll link that up top in case you want to check it out. And I adhered the butterflies with some liquid adhesive. Now that the box is decorated, I'll fold along the remaining score lines, add permanent tape runner, and adhere the box together. I wanted to utilize some of the scrap cardstock from the earlier cards, and I apologize that the camera is shaky. This cardstock was from the first box I created today. And using the scraps, I stamped and die cut some balloons using Simon Says Stamp Let's Celebrate stamps and dies. After embossing the balloon with Ranger white embossing powder. The strings of the die were cut from silver foil cardstock using the Simon Says Stamp Let's Celebrate coordinating die set. I chose craft paper for this box, and this fancy window also included in the set. Since I had made the treats that are going inside this box, I wanted to include my Handmade with Love by Krista Lynn stamp. This stamp I had made online for all the little homemade treats that I make and gift. I chose to stamp this image in weathered wood distressed oxide ink, and I'll set that aside to dry completely. Again, to close the window, I'll use some super glue and a piece of acetate. This time, however, I'm using a stamping tool to stamp my sentiment on top of the acetate. Before I adhered the acetate to the box, I did wipe it down with a paper towel and a little bit of rubbing alcohol. I didn't want to use a dryer sheet because I find that the dryer sheet sometimes leaves a little bit of a residue on the acetate and it can leave it cloudy. I found that a little bit of rubbing alcohol cleans up acetate nicely for embossing. To emboss this sentiment, I used Versamark ink and Recollections Gold Detail Embossing Powder. When embossing a sentiment that is this small, you want to make sure that your embossing powder is meant for detail, that it's a really fine powder. Otherwise, you might not be able to see the image or read the sentiment as easily. Before I heat set this sentiment, I made sure that my heat tool was really nice and hot. And when passing the heat tool over the acetate, I want to make sure not to leave the heat tool on the acetate in one spot for too long. Even though the acetate is heat resistant, if I leave the heat tool on one spot for too long, it will warp or melt the acetate. With the box created, the last thing to do is add the balloons. The balloons were added with a little bit of liquid adhesive. If you wanted to add a little bit of extra dimension to your balloons, you could always use like a foam tape or foam dots. The strings of the balloon were also added with liquid adhesive. I chose to adhere the string of the balloon first and trim off the excess after. Here's a look at all the boxes I created today. These boxes don't need to be used just for Valentine's Day. They can be used as thank yous, as shower favors, for Christmas gift cards, even birthday favors. The last thing to do is to fill our boxes with treats. These boxes fit 2 of the homemade treats or multiple chocolate foil hearts. These boxes hold a number of chocolate foil hearts. I was able to get 9 chocolate foil hearts into this treat box. These boxes don't need to be filled with candies. They also make great gift card holders. That concludes today's project. Thank you so much for stopping by. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.